What's up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and welcome to a Getting to Know You video. I grabbed my Monster Energy drink, and we're sitting down to discuss a little bit about Karak. Now, this is the first time I've ever had to do this, but it'll be the typical walking the walk review style, where we sit down, we have a fireside chat with no fire, for some reason, and we'll discuss a little bit about Karak. This was the #1 requested video of the video types that I put in the patron-only poll, and I was actually quite surprised by that. Also, remember, please, you can like this video, thumbs it up, that kind of thing, but don't share it. Don't tell other people about it. This is a patron-only video. And speaking of patrons, I do have to give them a shout out. I'm not going to waste your time and go into a long narrative, but I do have to say this. 350,000 subscribers, a very small number stepped up, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm trying to explain something. A very small number of people stepped up and made the largest change to the channel that has ever actually occurred since I started the big push when I got laid off. And the reason why that is because there have been so many times where I've wanted to create a review, or I've wanted to create a video, or I've wanted to work on something where I've been held back by worrying about where YouTube is in its placement, about how it's doing, and really spinning my wheels and trying to improve something that really didn't get much improvement regardless of the time spent on it. And it's been something that has bothered me since day one. It's an element of creating videos for a channel that is absolutely abysmal when it comes to support out there and trying to sort of figure it out when it comes to getting help from others. It's one of the reasons why you see a lot of other YouTubers on my channel, because I absolutely believe that everybody's voice should be heard, and it's interesting to hear what everybody has to say. But it's a point where, with my patrons at least, I can get my point out now with a little less worry, with a little bit more freedom. And it was interesting because I did the Rabbids review. I've done a couple reviews since. Some of them haven't come up on embargo yet. And it was sort of interesting to see, like, what will switch? Will anything really switch? Nothing switched. And that's exactly what I was hoping for. Absolutely nothing has switched. All I'm going to do is make sure that each and every patron feels that not only what they're given right now is absolutely returned to them, but that they see the same exact kind of content coming out from me at any time. I will absolutely do everything I can to make sure that you guys feel like you got everything that you deserve. Moving on, a little bit about Karak. Once again, this is odd, so I'm going to start and describe to you certainly about video games, which I feel that frames everything about me as I move forward into reviewing, and sort of will help you identify exactly what kind of person I am, and probably help you understand how I do the reviews the way I do them and why I do them in such a manner. Let's begin. Atari 2600. So I got the Atari 2600. Now, this thing was under my Christmas tree, and it was a certain, you know, the size of an Atari 2600 when you're my age as a kid, and it was the only system out. Remember, there was nothing else out at this time in America. So the Atari 2600, it's in a package. We know what it is. My mom and dad are like, you can't open that until Christmas morning, because we did a Christmas Eve kind of thing. First of all, you never tell a kid that. It's just not going to work. You never tell a kid that. So basically what we did is, right out of The Simpsons, my brother and I were like, can we open it? Can we open it? Can we open it? And my parents were finally like, fuck, okay, just open the damn thing, which is always awesome to have Christmas be a screaming parent, but that's what happened. We got it. It was a 2600. We sat down to play. You're going to hear this from a lot of people, especially my age. I played Combat. I played, you know, this. I played that. I played Pitfall. I played Frogger. That's great. But I could already tell where I was going from that age, because one of the first things I figured out about the Atari 2600 is it had a reset switch. And if you either barely put the cartridge in or you flick that reset switch just right, you could cause the game to go into a debug mode. Not every game would do this, but many would. One of those games was Dragonfire, which was one of my favorite games of all time. Basically, it was a bunch of different treasure, and you would run as a knight, and you'd try to gather the treasure and leave, while a dragon was on the top of the level going right to left and shooting fire down on you. And it was a fairly high-paced game, especially in those later levels. So when you'd flick that switch, basically debug mode would have all the treasure be on the right. So you could just run and do an L. Zing, 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 and I was just getting high score, you know, like 9999, whatever, until it flipped over. But I was already starting to pick up that something was hidden there. There was, you know, it may not have been the Wizard of Oz, but there was some wizard behind that curtain. And I wanted to see who the fuck it was, punch them, and basically take their place. Sega Master System. Sega Master System had a game that if you did not plug your cartridge or card in, there was a Snail puzzle game in there. Now, to me, this was creating nothing, or creating, yeah, something from nothing, which was quite interesting to me. Now, we all know that, of course, there was something in there. They programmed it in. They just put it onto the RAM inside of the system as a little tiny, you know, Easter egg. It doesn't matter. As a child, that stoked me out. I was just looking at it going like, holy shit, there's no cartridge in there. And we already knew that the cartridge had some kind of symbolic relationship with the fucking system, because if we put the cartridge in wrong, it wouldn't work. or we'd have to take it out and blow on it because it'd freeze. So we knew that there was something there. So the fact that nothing was plugged in and you turn it on and this Snail came up was just awesome to me. And then you go on to things like the Genesis. The Genesis is where I first really understood how music worked. You know, I can remember Phantasy Star's music for the dungeons. Dun, 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 because I fucking did it so many goddamn times. But when it comes to the Genesis, that's when the sound chips started coming into things. That's when people really started going out, the Tommy Talericos and so forth started making names for themselves. And you sort of branched out and started to see titles where they had samples of instruments. For example, Ghouls and Ghosts had some great samples of different woodwinds and violins at that time. And I was just really impressed by it. That's where I really started getting into the sound. But also, once again, the tech. I was looking at it and Star Control came out on the Genesis. And guess what? It had more megs in it than any other. It had 16, I believe. What was weird was your Genesis could go bad and it would still play all games, but that one, because that one required a larger memory readable footprint. And some Sega Genesis would over time just die out and they wouldn't be able to play that game, but they'd play any other game. And I had one of those systems. So that really stoked my fire for understanding the tech. I took that cartridge apart and I counted those fucking, the chips. I was so interested in what was going on inside. And the Sega Dreamcast or the Sega Saturn, I'm sorry, with its little tiny spaceship flying around when you put a CD in. That was so incredible. But even then I was starting to get involved in the tech aspects. I had the modem adapter, 56K modem, and I played Duke Nukem 3D against Cadiz, who you see sometimes on the channel. And it was so fantastic to be playing this game online with somebody else. And yeah, we were only like half a foot away from each other, but it was still amazing that you were doing it. You're like, how is this working, right? And surfing the web on your Sega Saturn with that thing was slower than shit and still the coolest thing ever. But additionally on that system, I started to learn what it was like to get more for less. And that's become a big deal to me. The Sega Saturn wasn't considered to be very powerful overall for what the new games were coming out in the genre of the new games that people were liking. But you got a game like Power Slave, Exhumed, I think, in Europe. And this game, colored lighting, the different stuff they did. I studied everything about Power Slave, how they did it, how they put it together. I studied all the different ways in which they were trying to handle getting around some of the problems with transparencies on the Saturn and how they were going about that to make Toshinden and those kind of games. It very much sort of framed the discussion as we move forward. Those really the years, I would say, where I was a mad scientist. And I was always a mad scientist. I was a kid, super young age, building shit out in the garage. I didn't know what the shit was. Mixing chemicals together. I am surprised I did not neuter myself with the amount of chemicals I was mixing together. And who knows, they were probably just different types of, antifreeze or oil. But back then it was like, hey, if the kid dies, build another, It was just like, that's the way it was. There was no warnings on shit. You were just out there pouring stuff and, I don't know, sometimes lighting it on fire. It was cool. And I was always like that as a kid. I was always taking things apart. The number of things of my father's that I took apart, I am surprised that dude lived through it, because I took apart some expensive shit. And people come home and it would be like Iron Man, but in reverse, where everything's taken apart, nothing gets put back together better. You know how Iron Man, you can take some bubble gum and a fucking poster and suddenly he's got a spaceship. I would take a spaceship and take it apart and have a rock at the end. Like everybody just be all, yeah, there was nothing successful. I learned nothing from this, but boy, was it fun, man. I would take shit apart. You'd have those issues where you'd be like, there's no screw holes, but it's still stuck together. What's going on? You get your butter knife and you'd be cranking in there trying to pull this thing apart. I was a mad scientist from a young age. And I always liked the technical bits in games. I always was super excited about them. I was always super excited about games anyway. But the idea that something was there, the idea that I could take it apart and I could look at it was fascinating. And then I have to say that this is where teaching is really important. Mr. Ford, he's unfortunately passed away, he was my programming teacher. And he was fantastic. And he was a programming teacher. He was a hard ass. You would get a job and he'd say, I want you to make this. And you would make it. And let's say you didn't really do much more than what your tutorial information had. He'd just tell you, he'd be like, that's not good at all. That you basically just copied this. And he would push you and he would push you and he would push you and you'd make something. You'd be so happy with yourself, but you knew deep down inside that you really didn't do as much. You just sort of got an idea and slightly adjusted it, which I'm not saying is bad. And he wouldn't say you're dumb. He would just say, that's not as great as you think it is. You need to do this. And he pushed you. He was always there pushing you. He was always there saying, but what can you do? And this is already when I started to get into discussions about how things were made. I always wanted to do more. I always wanted to figure out how to put things together that, even if it was an illusion, gave you that illusion enough so that you were surprised by it. That's important to me, because all games are illusion. It's how you put it together that surprises the gamer and causes them to feel that it's real, when in real life you look at it and you're like, that's fucking not real. For example, I made Blood Bowl. This is back when Blood Bowl, the board game version 1, was just released. I made a choose your own adventure on the TRS-80 and on the Apple II using BASIC and basically all text, a choose your own adventure. It would allow you to have special players. It would get flowery text. So it'd be like Karak von Karakian runs past, this yard line and gets smashed in the neck by his arch nemesis Ogog or whatever. And it would get an arch nemesis out of like 100 different names. For every game you restarted, it would take all this random stuff. It would take random flowery text, put it together, and it would create these different impressions of a real football game that somebody could play. There was punting, there were special teams, there were special plays. It was crazy. I still have it, actually. It works on my Apple II, which is, that's unbelievable. And I was always into that creation phase. I always was super interested in it. Sega Master System, Sega Genesis, PS, Nintendo 64, all of these things. Every time something came out, I was the first person who always knew about it. I was the first person who understood or wanted to understand what this type of scalar rotation was, or what this kind of thing did, or what a polygon was versus a sprite back in the day when, we were making that change. And PCs were the same way. I was always very much into it. Unfortunately, they were a little bit more expensive, so I did start out mostly on console. And one of the big outlets for me connected to this, and I think really frames the discussion and creates sort of the puzzle piece of Karak. That's really what we are. As we grow up, we're different pieces of our history put together to create whatever we are, and that's changing daily. But for me, one of the big things that I think frames the reviews and frames the way I look at games, the walking the walks, is really Dungeons and Dragons, of all things, is role-playing. And here's why. Trying to explain to 5 or 10, because I would do it with 10 people at a time, describe to 10 people in real time what is happening in a world, the sounds, the smells, the feeling, the texture of a world, and what they were doing, and tracking everybody and everything taught me a couple things. One, it taught me how to make sense of and track an incredible number of variables at any time, because I did not like paper. I was not a big paper fan. I'm not somebody who, enjoyed reading from an opening. It was more verbal. It was unscripted. It was sit and fireside chat with Karak time. So we would sit there and we would play, and I would have, 5 to 10 people, and tracking all of these things. And it taught me something you've heard me say in reviews, you've heard me say it in podcasts, which is take a step back. It taught me that if I followed too closely to one thing, I would lose sight of the other things. Even if maybe I would fix this one thing, or I would really do well here, I would lose sight of what the other characters were doing, or what the world around them was reacting to and engaging with them. So what I did was I stepped back. I removed my ego from it. You have to remove your ego from it and go, okay, what is exactly occurring? It can't be about me, and what I do. I need to tell a good story. It needs to be about the characters, about the players. And there's this tit-for-tat battle that happens in almost every Dungeons and Dragons game. And I know a lot of people right now are going, nerd! Guess what? Yeah, and it was awesome. That's the thing. A lot of times, nerds, some of the funnest, happiest people you ever meet. I was luckily enough a bigger kid, so I was able to do football, I did martial arts, and I role-played, and I never heard that term. I never was called a name. I was never teased. Those kind of things just didn't happen to me. I do get that it happened to some people, and that's very sad. But I'll tell you what, it's sad, while at the same time, they're probably going home and having a blast with their friends that doesn't involve a bunch of people fucking doing stupid shit and people punching each other or whatever. Unless they punch each other over a dice roll, which I actually do believe I saw one time. So I was big into role-playing, big into Dungeons and Dragons. I also wrote. And I think writing is another place in which the framing of these reviews has come to fruition. And that is certainly where a lot of writers will understand where they want to end their story. So you frame the entire plot, you frame all the devices into one thing so that your end result is what you expect. Your end result is your review, is your buy, wait for sale, rent, or your 1 through 10. I think that also will, in a bit, explain to you guys why I didn't go with a 1 through 10 scale and why it all works for me. But I was a big writer. I've got 2.5, almost 3 novels completed still that I never published. And I was big into that kind of stuff. I was big into this narrative. I was big into understanding how things work, and it all sort of came together for me. And I was very much into games, very much into Dungeons and Dragons, very much into the social elements as well. And I think social is quite important. It's why you see me in the YouTube comments all the time. It's why you see me in Patreon probably too many times. Some people say, oh, I get too many alerts. Sorry for giving you too much info. But I was always into that. I always felt that there was a need for this social interaction, because if you don't see it, you did start to see sort of an inclusiveness that came about, whether it be people only discussing one thing, only liking a certain thing, or socially just not being able to sort of be in a group without sort of being off, without a uniqueness to them that many people would consider, well, nerdy or geeky or just not socially acceptable. I loved those kind of things. I loved merging all those. So then it was time to graduate, and I was gonna destroy the world. This was my plot. I had plans, and those plans were to take over the world in whatever way I could, whether that be game creating or so forth. And I didn't at all. What I did was I was lucky enough to get a job to where one of the major duties that I had was to take information and put it together in a way in which an unrelated person could understand what the problem was. This is sort of what started, I guess, the idea of looking at things, multiple different elements of graphics, let's say, and then coming to an overall conclusion, understanding the price of the game and overall the system power that it may be on or the engine it may be using. And I did this for many years, over a decade, where I also was big into scheduling. And I think this is vital for the channel. It's something that you guys will hear me talk about a lot. Scheduling, understanding what you can get from a person in an allotted period of time, what work output, what will the work look like if you give them 4 hours versus 8? Is this person worth 2 hours versus 4 over here that might be a little bit better? Is this person a little bit faster at this, but this person over here a little bit faster at this? Does this system work a little bit better for doing this, but maybe not for this other element that you're tracking? Those things are very important and started to frame the way, once again, in which I do reviews. You'll also notice that especially when it comes to scheduling, I talk about how busy I am. And people are always surprised. They'll say, I can't believe Karak plays all these games. And I'll be like, I played less games than when I wasn't doing this as a full-time job. The reason why is because back then I had a job. I would come home and I knew I had a particular amount of time, and I'd force myself to play games because I knew that there was an allotted amount of time to do so, right? It was, I guess you would say it was just more important. When it comes to reviewing games now, I review the games that I get in, and there's time where I am rendering, there's times where I'm recording, there's times where I am playing games, and there's times when I'm doing other stuff, and I actually play less games, which is very cool. And thank God for most embargoes where they're smart and they give you the code early, even though it surprises everybody. Most of the time, somebody will see a fucking game review come up, and they'll be like, you just finished 2 games at the exact same time? And you're like, of course not, but whatever. So I did that for many years, and then I ended up luckily working, contracting, setting up call centers around the world. Some for some of the companies that I guess cover now, some of the software companies and so forth. And what that allowed me to do is look at what it's like to be at both ends of the spectrum, the creator and the person at the end complaining about a problem. And once again, stepping back and looking at how it all came together. And I did that for many years. At that time, I was also installing home theaters. I was also building computers, and I was also installing car stereos. I was very big into audio at that time, and that's sort of how that came to fruition. I've always been a big fan of, creating music, but I've never been that good at any particular instrument. So when home DAWs came into it, and you could use something like, Fruity Loops back in the day, or Magix or one of those programs, the ability to go in there and sort of make your own music was incredible to me. And it really taught me the things that I like, taught me what to care about, what not to care about, what was important for me, but might be less important for an artist or vice versa, because I was more of a layman. I was more of just getting in there and making something I thought sounded cool. All of that came together, and I ended up at a job where I was set up a call center, and it was one of those situations where it's really the perfect storm for what you're going to do next. It was almost everything you do as a reviewer without giving a score. And when I was laid off, I had started the channel already. I had a couple videos, and those couple videos had done very well, but I was, I had a job that paid well. I was paying for some bills and stuff like that, so I didn't really want to jump into the channel completely. When I started, or when I was laid off, I looked at the channel and I'm like, I can do something here. I can take everything I've learned and I can discuss games. Because something I had picked up in the 10 years prior is that a lot of people would ask me about a game. And they would trust me. And I never really thought about asking why. I was just like, oh, they know I play a lot of games. They know I break down games, so that makes sense. But a lot of people were asking me, and then I started getting emails from people that were friends of people who were like, hey, I hear you know about this game. And I could never really, I mean, I understood why, but I never really gravitated towards trying to figure out how to put that into any kind of job. But when I was laid off, I was able to do that. I was able to put things together. And then the last, before we jump into the channel, is how did the review system get created? Buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch. That's easy. I don't think in the entire time I was growing up, I ever told a game or told a friend a game was an 8. It makes no sense. What's an 8.5 versus an 8? You would have to go into the review and you would have to find some delineation, some sentence that indicated intrinsically that it's not an 8.5 anymore. It's an 8. That makes no sense at all. But to me, because I was poor as hell sometimes, it was very easy to say, hey, it's worth getting now. Hey, you know what? It's worth waiting till it's on sale. Or you know what? Can you go to Blockbuster and get it? Can you rent it? Or you probably don't even, you're not going to find that it's even worth a rental. It's going to be worth nothing, which is under $5 to $10. It's pretty crazy, especially for like, let's say a $60 game. Now, what's just impressive to me is that review or rent ability has gone up now. It's crazy. You get a lot of people are saying you can't rent anywhere. Gamefly, Redbox, Blue Box. There's about 150 online websites that have all kinds of trade systems in place for trading games. PSN, Xbox Game Pass, those are all rental systems. They're basically just the Blockbuster rental pass. You have all of these systems in which you can rent. Hell, you can consider the Steam demo a rent if you wanted, or the Steam refunds system a rent if you wanted to as well. And it was easier for me to describe it that way. And you know, I was talking earlier about you take what you're writing, and if you know the ending, you can come to a conclusion. To me, if I took my writing and the ending was the number 8, it wouldn't make any fucking sense at all. But if the ending was wait for a sale, I could flow to it easier. And it's one of the reasons why when I see like a reviewer or a page go, today we've decided that we're switching to, you know, away from numbered scores into worded scores. I'm like, what the fuck? You don't just, that doesn't make any sense at all. Because if you have been working for the longest period of time towards a very specific end goal, then you know what you're gonna do? You're gonna fucking transfer whatever you're now doing into what you were doing. You're gonna say, oh yeah, this is a buy, but in real life, they're saying this is an 8. They just decide 10 through 7.5 is a buy. It makes no sense at all. You have to be working towards those things. They have to be organic. One of the reasons why I think reviews work for me is because of all this other stuff, this technical stuff, taking things apart, my desire to create things in BASIC, my desire to see my work turn into something on the screen, to understand the Wizard of Oz moments. That's how the Walking the Walks work. That's the juice. Speaking of juice, fun factor in particular before we move into the channel status proper and talk about that for a second. Fun factor is important. Guys, you always get somebody who's like, the only games I've ever liked are the perfect games. I've never liked a shit. Bullshit. You've liked shitty games. Everybody's liked a shitty game. It is completely normal and okay to accept. Remove your ego from it. Disconnect from that shit. Disconnect from your opinion counting or equaling the number of testicles you have. That makes no fucking sense. Your opinion can be one thing, and it doesn't have to connect to you at some kind of such a personal level that your soul will be stolen if somebody finds out that you didn't like the coolest thing ever. This is not fucking high school. It's not a kindergarten. This is a place in which adults talk, and we can talk about these things, and we can all feel different things, and that's okay. You don't have to be connected so fucking dramatically to something that it becomes painful for you if somebody feels something you didn't, including somebody feels that a game is fun and you didn't. That's bullshit. So, fun factor, it's the juice. As you can tell, because I just got excited. Fun factor is awesome for me. It allows for me to look at a game and say, you know what? The game doesn't hit it in some places, but it's fun for me. And here's why. I love this feeling of this, and I love this feeling of that. And I get that the sound isn't the best, or I get that this thing isn't working the way I would like it to work. But in the end, it's fun. And fun is what matters. How many fucking board games have we all played where the rules really are sort of shit, but we have fun because we put a house rule in it? There's a reason why in almost every game you buy, it says, create your own house rules, create your own thing. It's because they want you to have fun. Somehow we've lost the idea of fun in video games, and I think that that is absolutely one of the saddest things that occurs in this industry currently. So, moving on after that diatribe. When it comes to the review system and putting everything together, I decided I was going to do this. Now, I'll cover a lot of the reviews and the behind the scenes in a different video, but talking about the channel and talking about me, my decision was to grow the channel and see what happened. I was about 45 to 50,000 when I went to the first PAX, and it was great. It was one of those experiences. I had somebody say, you know, hey, Angry Centaur, and I turned around and there was some dude and he's like, I've watched your shit. I absolutely love it. And I was like, wow, that was awesome. Like that was one of the greatest things ever. And here's why. Acclaim is useless on its own. Acclaim is nothing more to me than monkeys babbling and fucking fighting over a banana. That kind of stuff, that's just humans doing stupid shit. I don't need empty acclaim. What I like is when somebody says, hey, you know what? I don't really agree with your buy rating. But you know what I do agree with? Everything you said in the review. And I understand how you got to the buy rating, how you got to the rent rating, how you got to the never touch rating, how you got to the wait for sale rating. I get it. Hey, Karak, thank you for saving me some cash. I had a great Christmas because this game was truly broken or wouldn't work, and these 2 games I bought instead were awesome. To me, that is the most important thing that will ever happen on the channel, is when somebody says, I get it. I have found enjoyment because of something you have said and something you have pointed me to, or I was saved some kind of pain by maybe sitting back and waiting just a little bit until something was patched or something was fixed. You know, people get so personally connected, but it's something I always say, step away, remove your ego. If you do so, you can look at games from a far more strategic standpoint, and a standpoint that I personally feel is actually more connected emotionally because you have the emotion to connect to everything. You're not focusing on one thing. You're not saying, well, it's this graphic engine, so I'm not buying it. Okay, but guess what? There's a lot of games where you probably don't even know it's that graphics engine, and you've been playing it and you've been liking it. And that's the kind of stuff that I absolutely hate. It's great to me because patrons come in and they say, you saved me money. Patrons come in and say, B-Movie Night is awesome. Patrons come in and say, you gave me a free code for a game that I was thinking about buying. Thank God I got a free code because I didn't like it. Or I don't have the money. I was poor. I was poor to the point that I could not keep the electricity on and have rent paid. So I'd pay rent, and sometimes the electricity would be off for the weekend. You know, when I was growing up, there were hard times, and I get it. That's why I do that rent, buy, wait for sale rent kind of rating. I do it because I understand what it's like to be at different degrees of the amount of disposable income you have. There's an amount that changes as well. You know, it changes for people. And as long as we can all understand that, hey, you know what, this guy over here, he may not be where I am, but we both got some information out of Karak's review. That's what matters. That's what the channel's about. It's what the channel's always fucking going to be about. When it comes to patrons, I'm going to make sure that you guys always feel like you get the most out of being a patron. You get free games. You get B-Movie Night. We're doing D&D now, it sounds like, in the Discord, which isn't even connected to one of the tiers. I think we'll probably just open it up and see how it goes. I do a great deal in the patron for the patrons because the patrons do a great deal for me. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked a little snippet on the background and the craziness of Karak's life. This is odd for me. I apologize if it was a little disjointed. It's the first time I've ever done it, and it was odd, but I will probably get better at it in the future. Upcoming, you will see a behind the scenes for reviews, which is very in-depth. That'll be really fun. I also posted an older one that covered some of these elements. If you get a chance, you should watch that. Remember, again, you can like this. You can comment on it in the in the Patreon, but please do not share this video. For now, it is patrons only. So that's it for me. I hope you guys have an excellent week. Peace out. And I already said that. Enjoy your week.